now for the exchange. Joining me live now is Richard Johnson, Senior Lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. Richard, thank you so much for being with us. So just in terms of Wes Streeting, since that's the name that's being talked about in the more immediate future, he hasn't resigned just yet. But once he does resign, which a lot of people are saying he could do by tomorrow, how much of a problem does that pose for Keir Starmer? And does he have the necessary support needed to actually launch a leadership challenge?
I think this is Wes Streeting's moment, to be quite honest with you. I think it's a very, very serious challenge to Keir Starmer's leadership. Streeting is seen as a figure of the right of the Labour Party, and the composition of the Parliamentary Labour Party at the moment leans towards the ideological right of the party. So in terms of Streeting finding the required 20% of MPs, and that's what that 81 figure is, it's 20% of Labour MPs sitting in Parliament at the moment, I think he can find them. Where he has a little bit of difficulty right now is that I think quite a significant number of his supporters are members of the government. That's to say they're ministers or in the cabinet themselves. And so they cannot show any disloyalty to the Prime Minister in the way that backbench MPs can. But I think once Streeting announces his resignation from the cabinet, then he will be followed in resignations by other ministers who will announce their support for him, and other backbench MPs will come in behind them. And I'm very confident that he will find 20% of the parliamentary party to support him, which means that there will be a Labour leadership contest. And if Keir Starmer chooses to fight it, then that means that it will go before the membership of the Labour Party and members of the trade unions that are affiliated to the Labour Party.
Keir Starmer, I mean, he is clearly very tenacious. He has shown that he is willing to fight. He has shown that he is going to try to hold on as long as possible. When it comes, one thing that I am quite interested in is really the role of the British media in these sorts of leadership contests, because the British media are very good at having a singular focus. And when you're waking up every day as Prime Minister and the headlines over and over again on every British newspaper is, you know, is he in or is he out? When is he going to go? Or if you're Liz Truss, let's compare how long you last, compare it to a lettuce, for example. When that is the headline, there is a psychological momentum that comes with that is very, very difficult to overcome. It almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you have your own cabinet members and your various ministers who might be loyal to you, but they're reading the same headlines as everybody else. And at some point, they're going to begin to ask themselves, well, is it worth us continuing to be loyal to the Prime Minister when this is the mood of the country? Talk to us about the role the British media and the ruthlessness of the British media in all of this.
I'd put the British media alongside the polls, because I think the polls are a big part of this, that provide the background context to a lot of those stories about whether the Prime Minister is going to stay or not. If the Labour Party was leading in the polls, those stories just wouldn't be credible. And the reality is that under Keir Starmer's leadership, the Labour Party in government has seen a dramatic drop in its poll rating from being elected in 2024 already on quite a low poll share of 35%, which itself was a drop during the general election. Not many people comment on this, but during the 2024 general election, Labour actually started at 45 points in the polls and dropped 10 points just over the course of the election campaign, and was still able to win. And it won big because the right was split between Reform and the Conservatives. But that, to me, was never a good sign for Keir Starmer. And the slope has just continued down and down and down until the Labour Party has just been sat in the teens for well over a year and a half now. And so in that context, you get lots of MPs who are talking to journalists, who are saying, I'm really unhappy with where we are in the polls. And the journalists are writing up these stories saying Labour MPs are really unhappy with the leadership of Keir Starmer. And so it sets this kind of climate, which is a very negative climate for his leadership to operate in. And so this has been a long running story, and people were waiting basically for the local elections to confirm what the polls
Right.
had been showing.
Sometimes, though, you have a situation in just if you look at British electoral history where, a prime minister does quite badly in local elections and is still manages to survive somehow. What determines whether, when you have a disastrous local election result, what determines whether you are able to hang on to your position? I always wonder whether it's about, there are many factors, I'm sure, but I imagine that one factor is about the loyalty of your cabinet ministers. I mean, you want to have cabinet ministers that are loyal to you, who are not necessarily easily influenced by negative headlines, who are, ambitious enough to do their job well, but not so ambitious that they're plotting and maneuvering against you. What determines whether or not you can actually survive disastrous election results as PM?
Well, it could be about loyalty to you, or it could be that just none of them are any better than you. And so I think, for example, in 1968, there was a terrible set of local election defeats for the Labour Party. Labour lost every seat in Birmingham and Leicester and did terribly in seats like Leeds and Sheffield and Sunderland. It lost every borough in London except for three. And there was real expectation that the Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, would resign. But the reason Wilson survived that, and he stayed Labour leader for another 8 years, was because none of the other potential candidates were particularly strong. The previous chancellor had to be moved out of his position because there'd been a currency crisis. His deputy had resigned and was sitting on the backbenches. The Home Secretary, basically, Wilson went to him and told him, "You're not going to like this job. It's really tough governing Britain at the moment. And trust me, your life is going to be miserable as Prime Minister. Maybe you would rather be," he'd moved to that point to be Chancellor. His name was Roy Jenkins. He said to Jenkins, "I'm not going to stay here for too long. Wait it out." And actually, that was a bit of a trick from Wilson, because by the time that they waited it out, the moment had passed and Wilson was able to recover his position. So with Keir Starmer, I think one of the things that people had speculated on was, does he survive? Because there's no candidate who's kind of perfectly poised to take him on. Everyone has something wrong with them. What I mean by that is there's some kind of scandal, or they're still recovering from, or they're not in Parliament, or there's some cloud over them in one way or another. And the one who has the least problems is Wes Streeting. He has some problems, but the one who has the least is Wes Streeting. And it looks like Streeting may seize the moment in a way that Roy Jenkins did not in 1968.
That is fascinating. I mean, especially because, as you point out, so many of the other candidates do have something, quote unquote, wrong with them. I mean, from my understanding, Andy Berman would be the most popular, the sort of one that everybody would want to run. But the biggest issue is that he's, of course, not an MP. So that's a massive problem. We will see
And
what happens.
Starmer's parliamentary selection, that's the key thing.
Right.
Starmer has the say over his fate.
Right. So that is key, as you point out. That's such an important point as well. Richard Johnson, that was a fascinating discussion. We'll see what happens tomorrow, right? Tomorrow is another day. We'll see what happens.